Hello and welcome to the very first Tech Talk Podcast. I'm going to be your host today. My name's Brandon. I'm going to be joined by a very special guest, Josh Veen, who is going to be our main host for this show. So we thought we'd dive into and run it back a little bit on the history of Josh and what brings all of his knowledge together and why we are doing this. We're going to dive into everything: Husqvarna, WORX Plus, King Concepts, Hyperfloor, ProGrind. We're going to dive into it all, guys, so you guys are going to get to know Josh even better, just like he's going to be your best friend, just like he's mine. Tune in, guys. This is going to be great. Hello and welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the very first Tech Talk Podcast. I'm going to be your host today, Brandon Ward, and I am joined by the one and only Joshua Veen. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. I just want to correct you on something. That there's actually more than one Josh Veen, but that's okay.
That's all right. Well,
this is the one we got today.
Okay, this is the one we got today. We happy with this one?
I'm happy to be here with you, Brandon.
Oh.
Looking forward to this.
Well, I'm glad you're here too, mate. So, Josh, what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be questioning you about a few different things, and we're going to dive into what has brought you to where you are today. So we're going to dive through a bit of the history because I already know a little bit, but I'm sure those at home would love to know the history of how you've become one of the most knowledgeable individuals in this game. So, yeah, do you feel comfortable with me diving into you like that?
Look, I think there's some pretty big, broad statements that you're making. And, well, let's just get into it and see what happens.
Let's just get into it.
Yeah, feeling a little bit uncomfortable about the big statements, but let's move on.
Oh, that's what I do best, is make you uncomfortable. So let's keep it going. So why don't we start off, Josh, by when did you start grinding and polishing?
I started grinding and polishing probably when I was 13 or 14 years old. There was a family business which my father had started, and of course you got all the school holidays where you go on site, and at least back in those days, and you help out the family business, and that's where I started grinding. But it wasn't in concrete.
Wasn't in concrete? No.
It was pardon me. The family business at that time was actually in natural stone, so a lot of stone resurfacing, terrazzo, marble, granite, all those types of things. So that's actually my background is wet grinding and polishing with small machinery. That's really where it started for me.
Okay. So what did grinding look like then? Was it just like, it's a while ago now, was it just like rubbing two stones against the ground? Like, what was it like in the dark ages there, mate?
Yeah, I didn't realize I was that old until you brought it up. Back in those days, it was really much smaller platform grinding. At that point in time, planetary grinders were very, very small, but very, very new to the industry. The most common type of machine for stone back then was what we call a swing machine today, which is a single head machine, high torque, low RPM. So when the planetary machines came into the market, they were around about the same size. But you could imagine with three spinning heads underneath, there was a lot more involved in those machines. So they were significantly more expensive than a swing machine.
Okay, interesting. And let's sort of dive back into when you started grinding. So you said you were in high school then. Was this something you've always sort of wanted to get into?
It's all I ever dreamed of. That racing bikes in the Tour de France and racing the Grand Prix. And concrete polishing.
Well, I can definitely tell you're a bike rider, because for those of you at home that haven't seen Josh's calves, they are quite magnificent. So yeah, those of you that get to catch him in shorts, it's quite a sight.
I kind of feel like you just got me here to make me blush today.
It's a bit of that. And then I'll ask some harder questions as well. It's a bit of a sandwich, you know. Oh, Joshy, so you mentioned in the terrazzo and natural stone. So we don't really do much of that anymore. So how did it transition to the concrete side of things?
Yeah, okay. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was intentional to begin with. When I was 16, 17 years old, I left school and went full-time into the family business. At that time, my brother Tim, who you also know, my father Harry, were running the business. And what we were, our main focus at that time was actually grinding and polishing terrazzo, predominantly up and down the eastern seaboard for all the shopping malls. So think all of the new Westfields, all of the extensions of those facilities. That's kind of what we were doing. So we were doing a lot of travel. I think I traveled for maybe 2 or 3 years consistently from one new shopping mall to the next new shopping mall to another shopping mall extension, working predominantly at night when we were doing existing shopping centres. So there was a lot of night work, there was a lot of travel. And while the money was good, it was quite tiring, and being on the road all the time was getting pretty old. So we had at that time, say for instance, when we got into a particular stage of doing this for a number of years, we had acquired some larger machinery, and so we wanted to convert them to doing something else locally. Now there wasn't enough work doing shopping malls in Victoria, which is where we wanted to stay, close to home base. So we had to start exploring different opportunities. We focused on doing floor preparation with our planetary grinders, and basically that was to effectively replace shop blasting, which was pretty much the only type of floor preparation that was being done. So we were working or subcontracting to guys who were doing leveling compounds, epoxy coatings. We were now removing coatings and creating a nice textural profile on the concrete for putting a roll coat of epoxy over, and with very, very little preparation to the surface after we'd finished with it. So that was something new. We take that pretty much for granted these days, but that was new technology back in the 90s. And I guess the shop blasters didn't like it very much because it was a as a threat to their industry, but it was that the applicators really liked it because it was so much easier to work with a diamond scratch profile than it was to try and work with a shop blast profile for certain applications.
Okay. Wow. All right. I can see the transition there. So your experience as a contractor, how has that differed over the years now as well? So the contractors and how it all started for you guys versus what the contractors are experiencing now. What sort of major changes have you seen there?
What we were experiencing back then?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So the grinding industry didn't exist in the concrete side. So all type of concrete work was done with was really agricultural machinery, single head grinders, stones, diamond, industrial diamond tooling was just coming out at that time. And it was done, making lots of dust or making lots of slurry. That was how that was done by the competition, I guess, at the time. Really crude methods at that time. So what we were doing was basically pioneering a whole new market. And as you could imagine, when you're pioneering a new market, you're going to have a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge for us was probably the biggest challenge for us was adapting machinery that could actually do this type of work.
Okay, so what were you seeing with that machinery that the adaptations needed to be made? Like, what's some specifics you can sort of dive down on there?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, we were doing a lot of work wet, and now we're going into concrete and we're trying to do it dry. We're trying to do it dry because our main customer base is epoxy coatings or floor leveling guys, and they're not going to want to deal with a floor covered in slurry or with the moisture that'll be in the concrete. So we're trying to get a machine that was designed to grind wet, and we're trying to push it into grinding dry. And so we've got a really big change in temperature happening under that machine, and even the environment that we were working in. So we went from working on predominantly smooth surfaces and grinding and polishing those and wet to grinding dry, massive increase in temperature, and on rough surfaces to make them smooth. So now we're giving these machines an absolute pounding, and we're heating them up while we do it.
Yeah, it sounds like those machines would have, definitely had a lot of great time. So did you cycle through many machines like that, or how did you overcome that problem?
We had at that time, I think we had about 3 or 4 crews, and we had 5 grinding machines in operation at all times. And then at the time, I was working in the workshop, and we always had 2 machines down. So it's just a cycle of machines going through the whole time. So we weren't getting a lot of hours out of these machines. They were costing us a lot of money to keep them running. But we were making some great inroads in the industry because it was fast, and like I said, the epoxy guys and the flooring guys really liked it because it was just such a smooth surface that was left behind afterwards.
So, Josh, take us to your first polished concrete job. Everybody remembers their first, right? So, tell us a bit about that and sort of what your processes were for your first polished job and how did it turn out?
Brandon, you make it sound like it was such a well-oiled machine, and that the education process was maybe following the dots, but it absolutely was not. And to be honest with you, I was not an early adopter of polished concrete. I did not like it. I was involved at the R&D side of things, and I was not enjoying the process of learning. And the reason is mostly because we were a contracting company, and like so many other contracting companies, we've got a lot going on, and somebody wants us to try something new. And that somebody was my father and 2 brothers that wanted me to try this system that they were creating on the side. And I didn't like it because I had a system that worked. I could grind concrete back. I could put a sealer on it, and customers were happy. And for me, I was also running a bunch of other guys on site, and we were also at that time in parallel developing new machinery and technology in that side of things. So I was constantly having to try all this stuff on site, and I just wanted to follow my system that I knew that worked and get out of there. So when there was this friction in the family business of creating this new product, being mechanically polished concrete, I was not an early adopter, and I was essentially taking advice and directions from my older brothers and my dad on what the system would look like and what I needed to try. And so my first project, I actually don't remember which one it was, because so many projects that we did to begin with were suck and see. Let's try this and see how it goes. And then sometimes it would be successful, and then sometimes it would be a fail. And then guess what was the easiest way for me to make the job successful?
Put a sealer over it.
Is to revert back to my original plan and put a sealer over it and be done with it. And then we would try again on another project. And meanwhile, of course, there was a lot of R&D going on back at home base, in parallel to the projects that were being executed on site. So it's hard to say what was the first project and that sort of stuff, because there wasn't really a first project. If I've got to say the first memorable project for us would have to be Mirvac Tower 5 down at Docklands, where we did a white concrete. And this is probably the first, from memory anyhow, this was the first concrete slab that was designed specifically for mechanical polished concrete. So we had full control over the selection of the materials, and based on the process that was to follow afterwards. So everything had to be compatible. So we got to work with engineers and suppliers to make this, and that I would say is probably the most memorable. And just because we got to design it doesn't mean that it went, smoothly, because it had its challenges.
Did you end up just whacking a sealer over it, or how'd you go with the finish?
No, we didn't just whack a sealer over it. No, but that particular project is it's quite well known globally because it was used for a lot of marketing and advertising for mechanically polished concrete for quite some time. Back in the mid 2000s, and I still go past there probably every 3 or 4 years, stick my head in that foyer and have a look, and it's still looking impressively good today.
Yeah, it brings a tear to the eye, does it? So I'd love to get more into the machinery and the R&D side of things, but I think we're going to question Tim a bit more about that.
Oh, you should.
But I would like to ask you about a business called King Concepts. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. So as you've probably gathered, I was mostly working in our sister company, which was the initial company, ProGrind Australia. And so I was doing a lot of project delivery and training during that time because we did everything. All right, we did everything from grinding stone to grinding concrete, grinding seals, lift and remove, floor demolition, everything, leveling, Designacrete, which is a whole nother episode. Wow. And then we had this manufacturing company going as well because, we like to do a lot of things. We were changing the industry, and that basically meant that as a byproduct, we had to make a lot of our own stuff. And there was born this company, King Concepts. And that was a company that was born out of necessity. As I said, we were forging a new market. There was not suppliers of equipment. This is all pre-internet. If you could imagine a world like that.
I can't. I've been around since the internet's been around. So
correct. It's So back then, if you wanted to order something online, you'd have to handwrite a letter to Jeff Bezos, and then he would respond, confirm all of your details, and then you would send a letter back, and then he'd send the parcel. Okay. Wow. So yeah, the King Concepts was born out of necessity for ProGrind, but it wasn't an intentional thing. We were building machinery for ourselves and solutions, tooling. And then we actually had I'll say a competitor, because they were big into shot blasting and coatings, contacted us and said, we'd like you to make some of those machines for us because we've seen what you're doing down in Melbourne. And so as a family, we had to make a decision on that. And we really liked the fact that we were the only guys in Australia who had this type of technology, and we could have gone for world domination. And we chose, however, to go into manufacturing. We'd never done it before. And so we made, I think our first batch of machinery was five 820s, and things went from there. And I guess the reason why we went for the manufacturing side as opposed to personal world domination is that we don't really believe in holding this stuff to ourselves. And we know that if there's a whole lot of other people that get access to this, we kind of believe that when the tide rises, all boats rise with it, not just ours. And that's kind of always been our thing.
Yeah, well, that's a big part of what we're about here at WORX Plus as well. So, it's awesome to see the history there and where it's come from. But just quick one on that manufacturing. Where did the manufacturing start?
Oh, well, the manufacturing, of course, started where all quality manufacturing happens, and that's in the garage at home.
That's awesome. For those of you listening and watching at home, I have seen some photos of the Veen team pulling apart machines on the front lawn. So it was very much a Kickstarter from the garage. So yeah, it's good to hear it straight from you, Joshy. So a bit more on the King Concept side of things. So going forward with the manufacturing and so forth, which I'm sure I'll dive more into with Tim, or someone else will dive into with Tim, but what was your role in King Concepts and where it grew from there? Because it's not something we sort of hear about now. So what happened with King Concepts?
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of my responsibilities for King Concepts was not directly involved with King Concepts in the early days. I was still very much tied to the contracting business, which is great because we were doing a lot of polished concrete. And that meant that we had the capacity to trial a new technique or a new method, a new tool, and get feedback on it very, very quickly because we had so many projects running at the same time. And so while I wasn't working directly in the manufacturing business, I was doing a lot of proving for R&D in those projects that we were doing. So that was the early days of King Concepts for me. going back to some comments that you made earlier, I was also a full-time cyclist at that time. So I actually was in and out of the business a little bit in those years because I traveled a bit for racing. When I stopped racing, I came back to Australia and I spent some time in ProGrind and then dived full
Full bore?
No, not full bore. You don't dive full bore. Head first, that's right. I came back to Australia and then dived head first into the King Concepts business. And what that meant for me, my involvement was I was traveling to the US where we were making inroads at the time. I was spending a lot of time on the roads with our distributors and doing a dog and pony show where we were jumping in a truck with my partner Dean Eastwood, who's also from America. He would set up a whole bunch of customers for us to go and see, and we would tow a trailer full of equipment all over the US and go show contractors demonstrations. This is the machine. This is how to use it, and this is what it could do.
Oh, wow. So you did a lot of training over in the US. Did you notice many differences between the US market and the Australian market, seeing as you've had vast experience with the ProGrind team here?
Yep.
And being on the tools and doing your training over there?
There was, I guess, the most notable difference was the expectation of polished concrete, and I think there's the main reason for the big expectation. I think the reason for the big difference in expectation, the big contrast in expectation, is the way that mechanically polished concrete entered the market in Australia versus the US. Now, from my understanding, in the United States, mechanically polished concrete got into the market in the manufacturing and warehousing side of in the industrial side of the industry. So they were looking for a non-dusting and serviceable surface. So we're kind of looking at this is a solution to a problem. In Australia, the problem was ours at ProGrind. And when I say that, the problem was that we had a overlay system where we were putting down what looked like a terrazzo, and it was very expensive, but it was very fast, and that was called Designacrete. And so that was a veneer system. And the problem that we had was that veneer system couldn't be mechanically polished, but we had a strong market for that product. So that is why we developed the other mechanical polished concrete process with the concrete suppliers and the engineers, the one we spoke about before for Mirvac, because that allowed us to use concrete as a substrate for us to polish. Now we could get a superior finish on the surface that we couldn't do on the veneer product, which really kicked off the demand for mechanically polished concrete, because we were doing that for the same kind of price as the veneer, but you were choosing all of the type of, the matrix color, the aggregates, all that sort of stuff that was going into your project. So if you were having a mechanically polished concrete floor in your house, which back then was called Hyperfloor, that was probably something that only someone who was building a $1 million home could afford back then. Whereas in the United States, the concrete was being polished as basically a solution to prevent a floor from dusting and to ensure that it was going to be maintainable with auto scrubbers and that sort of thing. Essentially an alternative to putting an epoxy coating on. So when you talk about what are the differences, well, we were doing it for the market that was buying it because they really wanted to have it, versus a market that wanted to spend the least amount of money on maintaining their surfaces on a broad scale.
Okay. Do we still see that as being quite dominant over there at the moment?
Look, I would say the US market is still heavily driven by the bean counters as far as the demand on a broad spectrum. The Australian market is probably, for mechanically polished concrete, is still around about 80% residential. So it's probably the flip in the United States. It's maybe 20% residential for mechanically polished concrete and 80% commercial and industrial.
Okay, interesting. And Josh, you mentioned a little buzzword there for hyperfloor.
Yep.
So I'm sure most of us have heard of hyperfloor. Where did that start?
So hyperfloor started as a mechanically polished concrete product. First of all, kicked off inside of, as a product for ProGrind. So nobody knew what polished concrete was back then because it didn't exist. So we had to create a brand name for it. As a manufacturer at King Concepts, we created the brand Hyperfloor, a product for not only ProGrind to go and sell, but we had some other instigators in the market with us at the time. We had Southeast Floors up in Queensland who were really big pushers of the brand at the time. And we also had Polished Concrete Limited over in New Zealand that were really building the brand recognition for Hyperfloor. And that's how architects were finding out what polished concrete was.
We've mentioned Hyperfloor and creating a brand name for it in Australia, and you've got a few contractors that jumped on board. But really, what was polished concrete in its infancy and how did it look? Is it just high-end homes or industrial, like a bit in the States? What did it look like in Australia and sort of when did you notice the big boom?
Yeah, okay, sure. Good question. Early days was high-end residential. And so we were working a lot with a company called Mentone Premix. They were kind of the only guys at the time who were doing what we called architectural screeds, where you could go and choose your own aggregate color and your own matrix color. They were the only guys doing it at the time. And so very expensive to do, of course, because everything else was just grey from other suppliers. So they had a very unique proposition there, as did we, partnering with them. So it was very niche to begin with. And I guess we had a few good breaks. We had the residence for Mark Simmons, the Simmons Home Builders, volume builders. He really liked polished concrete, and they did a massive portion of his residence in a polished concrete decorative mix, interior, external, massive amount of work at their house, and that was a really great platform for us. My sister Jaka, who you know well, had also come into the business at that point too. So she was working heavily on not just in HR but on marketing, and she was really getting all of this, all of the images of what we were doing out into the architectural firms. My father was out selling Hyperfloor into the architectural firms, and then the contrast was that there was this other company that was starting to turn up on our shores, and they were selling something called Superfloor. They had some nice looking brochures, but they didn't really have any aggregate to them, and it was really just showcasing, industrial floors. So there was a big difference between what the two manufacturers were doing, because now HTC was starting to sell machinery into the market because we're getting a few years into it now.
Yep.
So
what year would this be roughly?
This would probably be around 2002, 2003, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
From memory. So now we're starting to see some competition turn up on the Australian soil, and there's a difference there between what's being offered, and so ProGrind is doing high-end niche projects and slowly starting to expand into retail. Those retail stores was like barbecues galore back then, I think. And so those were old concrete or existing concrete. So that was something different for us, because now we're not in full control of all the variables, but we're still 100% committed to getting a good result. And this is where we started to learn a lot of additional stuff as well, because now we had to build a platform that was compatible on all surfaces, all types of concrete. And so, but there was still a lot of, the market was still predominantly grind and seal. So grind the concrete, finish it to a 120 grit, and then put a single part solvent-based polyurethane on it.
Sounds like it's right up your alley.
Always made for an interesting drive home.
All right, Josh. So 2002, 2003, roughly in that time frame, what was the US market looking like? What was that reflecting from the King Concepts brand and sort of some major players over there?
Yeah, okay. So 2002, 2003, we were just starting to get some traction over in the US with some smaller distributors. So we're starting to send machinery over there. The US is starting to see some of the benefits of that. The main players at the time was HTC. They were distributed by Vic. I think it was Vic International who was distributing their equipment at the time. And then there was Diamatic, which was a Dutch manufacturer, and they were distributed by Sace Company at the time. So they were, from memory, the two main machines which were available in the US at the time, and then we were throwing the King Concepts machine in with the mix.
And how did you notice the effect of the King Concepts machinery over in the States?
Well, the effect that we were having was that we were having to manufacture a whole lot more.
Is that where spring heads came from? Am I stepping on a nerve there? Because I had a feeling spring heads came from the shipping side of things. So I was just going to ask that question, whether that was around that time or...
Spring heads, look, I guess that's a nuisance for me, but if you want to crucify someone for spring heads, you crucify Tim. Okay,
we'll save that one for him.
Like I said, I was more involved in the proving that they were no good, and the sales. It's not that they were no good. They were to overcome a particular challenge at the time, like you say, in logistics. But the machinery was getting a lot of traction over there, and we were beginning to spend a lot more time going to and from the US as we were setting up more distribution.
Awesome. So what exactly happened to King Concepts? It's, from what you told me, getting a lot of traction between Australia, the US, and a bit of New Zealand. So talking timeframes, what year was it when we sort of start to see a bit of a change?
So we start to see a bit of a change in colour in 2007. In 2007, we sold the family business King Concepts to Husqvarna Construction Products, and of course everything started to be turned orange at the factory. Same machinery and same manufacturing facility at that time, but everything was coming out in a different colour. And of course, they have a much bigger global distribution. So now those machines, Hyperfloor system, the dust extraction or dust management systems are going all over the world.
Oh, awesome. So what did your role become then once everything became a bit more orange?
When everything became a bit more orange, my job was to be a product manager for the United States market.
Okay. So what did that look like?
Yeah, interesting. It was an interesting job to give to me because I don't feel like I really had the credentials to be able to do a good job of it. And I was still based in Australia. So that was really hard to do because a lot of the product management stuff is also ensuring that all of the right product mix is on local soil.
Yeah. And how old were you at the time?
I was 27.
27?
Yeah.
Okay. So based in Australia, going over to the US often or?
Initially, so at the busiest period, just before the acquisition of King Concepts, I was going over to the US usually for 2 weeks at a time, and then I'd be home for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'd go back over there. So I was going pretty much every month to the US. And then we had the acquisition, and it was interesting because it was, you probably don't need to come over here anymore. We got this. You be the product manager, which is really hard to do from abroad. Again, you still got the challenges of there's no Teams meeting, there's no Zoom, nothing like that back then.
It was all handwritten letters, was it?
Well, I guess you had Skype just getting off the ground.
Oh, yeah.
So it was quite difficult to do. And of course, I didn't know any of my colleagues over there.
Yeah, that does make it hard to make some connections, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right. So product manager for Husqvarna. Where did it go from there?
We got a GFC.
Oh, yeah, ouchie.
Yeah. So we got a GFC thrown in the mix, and that was basically became a state of emergency. And my contract stipulated that I would be available wherever, whenever. And
kind of like Batman, hey?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I saw the light in the sky, and I had to move to Kansas City.
Oh, the big smoke.
Yeah. So Husqvarna's head office in the US is in Olathe, Kansas, and so they were in a bit of a spot of bother. They just purchased a company that had a whole lot of equipment sitting in the US, and they couldn't move it. So they suggested that if I moved over there, things might go better. I don't think they meant for the entire economy. I think they just meant for that specific product line.
Okay. So did you move to Kansas?
I moved to, well, let's say I moved to Kansas City. It's in Missouri.
Okay.
But I drove to Kansas every day for work.
How long was that drive?
That's about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, not too bad. Not too bad. All right.
If you're from Kansas or Missouri, you understand why I have to be specific.
Okay, yes. Apologies to our American listeners out there. So over in the States, being product manager, what did you find your day-to-day was?
Yeah, okay. It was interesting being a product manager in a really big company. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really have the credentials to do that job. And so naturally I fell into a support role. We had a sales team over there specifically for surface prep, which was great, an absolutely fantastic bunch of guys. And because of the GFC, Husqvarna was going through some turmoil themselves at the time. Their president had also left before I got there. Not the American president, the president for the CEO of the American operation had left. And so they were in a bit of a state of flux without a leader. They had also acquired, at the same time as us, a company called Softcut. And so they had been integrated into the ethos as well. And so it was a kind of an interesting time because everyone was very worried about what was happening in the business and because of the economy that was going on around them. And so it was an interesting time to be walking into an organization. Not long after I had gotten there, someone had put their hand up to take on the role of CEO or the president of sales for the US operation. That was a guy by the name of Steve Chamberlain, and he came from the Softcut company. And when he got that title, he came to me and said, "Hey, look, how about you come and join the sales team? Can see the product manager thing's not really working out for you. You're entrepreneurial. Why don't we get you in a role that suits you? I'm thinking probably, maybe you could be the the North American sales manager for surface prep instead of being a product manager. That way you'll be part of the sales team reporting to me. And what do you think?" And I said, "That sounds fantastic." So I moved out of being a product manager, which I was really no good at. And you can ask anyone who worked there at that period, and they would confirm that for you, I'm sure. And so I went into a sales role and started to lead the surface prep sales team and work with the other brilliant minds at Husqvarna at the time.
So this was your first experience in sales because did you do much of it with King Concepts and ProGrind, or you were mainly on the tools?
With King Concepts, I wasn't doing so much of the sale as I was doing the demonstration and the training.
Yeah.
And so, this was really my first proper sales role.
Okay. Awesome. So, now you're the national sales manager in the States. What did your role look like then with supporting your team and, trying to get more of these machines out during the GFC?
Yeah. Okay. So we started with a deficit because we had sent over a whole bunch of machinery. And when Husqvarna had acquired the company, they had a large distribution network. And as you would hope, being a distributor, when Husqvarna buys a new company, they've got a whole lot more to offer in their product range. So you want access to that too as a distributor. So Husqvarna, of course, made that available to their distributors, and the distributors soon found out that this is a really technical machine and is very hard to support and to sell. It's a big ticket item, and they weren't moving them. And so they had to go back to Husqvarna and say, look, we don't want these machines because we don't know how to sell them. It's very difficult to sell. We're amidst the GFC right now. So we've got all this capital tied up. So Husqvarna, really a remarkable company, really invested in their relationships with their distributors, and they took all that machinery back.
Oh, wow.
So when I turned up there was a big pile of inventory that had been returned that we had to try and find a new home for. So it was a bit of pressure.
Yeah. Where do you start with that?
Yeah, good question. Well, Husqvarna has a structure where they've got their distribution network, and they also have a heavy user, which is where they go direct to market with their more technical machinery. Those guys are mostly in sawing and drilling, and at the sales team that they had acquired were pretty good at finding homes for these machines, and that's kind of what really kicked off the success for that product category in Husqvarna in the US.
Awesome. So, Josh, you're talking about the really good support that Husqvarna was giving the distributors and their customer base. So what else did that entail? Was there training involved with the machinery? Because as you said, like technical, obviously look, new machinery for these guys, not sure where to start with it. So what did you and the rest of the sales team do there to really explode that market?
Yeah, it was a really busy time. And we were trying to push this new product out to the market, being the grinding machines, all the different tooling, and the whole system. I was really fortunate that having moved my life over to the US, the guys who I met there in the sales team were just as dedicated to the brand. And so a typical week would look like, if we'd sold a new machine to someone, it didn't matter where they were in the US, someone in our sales team would drive, deliver that machine, and then spend however many days they felt necessary to commission that machine before they would leave. So contractors had to feel comfortable with what they just purchased. So our guys might be there for 2 days or 3 days, teaching them the ins and outs of the machine, teaching them diamond tooling, teaching them the hyperfloor system. And when everyone was satisfied, that's when the sales guys would pack up the truck and drive home.
So a bit like what we do with our seminars now, except more one-on-one, and starting from scratch with the machine and going through full process, bit troubleshooting as well, I'm assuming in there. Yeah, well, that's really good service. And how many customers do you reckon you would have done that yourself to?
Look, we also, in parallel to this, we did seminars too.
Okay.
So we also did training seminars, mostly at Husqvarna, at their head office and in Olathe. It would be hard to describe just how many people that we've trained, because it wouldn't be in the low hundreds in the 2.5 years that I spent in the US living there. It would have been in the high hundreds.
Wow, well, that's a lot of K's traveled, or miles traveled, if you will, for the States. So, and you had a team of how many?
We had 4 dedicated reps for the surface prep. We also had a little bit of help from the heavy user team, and of course, distributors were working hard to get the machinery out there. Some specialized distributors, and so you've always got those few people who see the machinery or the system, and they just love it, and they become the internal champion. And there was a few of those around the country, also in Canada too.
Oh yeah.
So that was a lot of fun. But my week typically looked like Monday out the door, Friday back to my apartment for 2 days to wash my clothes, so that we could go back out again the week after. And it was very much the same for the sales team.
Wow. And you said you did that for 2.5 years.
Yeah, it wasn't all like that, but certainly in the early first year would have been lots and lots of traveling until we got a bit of momentum going. But yes, it was very, very involved from a travel perspective and training on site.
So what did you see in the turning point from that first year of going out and really hitting it hard, getting guys trained up and that sort of thing? What did you sort of notice as the turning point? Was it guys sort of training their own staff and that sort of thing, or just coming to seminars? What did you notice there?
I think the thing that we noticed was that is that once we had taught people from the ground up the ins and outs and really invested the time in them, they understood the process and they had the skills to be successful because they could work out most things themselves. Previous experience for them prior to that, it was they would get something from a supplier over here, something from a supplier over there, and they were trying to put everything together. And whenever something failed, nobody knew the answer because they didn't all understand each other's products, nor did they understand what the contractor was trying to execute on site. So I guess the biggest thing that we saw was that we started to get this momentum in the market because people were starting to be able to be self-sufficient as a result of what we had invested in them, imparting as much knowledge into them as we possibly could. And they were starting to be, a little bit dangerous on site.
Hot and dangerous, love it.
Yeah.
So your experience over in the States, Josh, with that training, how did that inspire the training that we now do at WORX Plus?
Yeah, good question. I think the underlying purpose for what we do has remained the same from that time that we made the decision to go into manufacturing. And, we could have kept that for ourselves and stitched up the market. I'm sure that someone else would have come in with, competing products, naturally. So you can't think that way. But for us, it's always been, when the tide rises, all the boats go with it. And so I guess for us, it's always been the same kind of deal, is that we want everyone who's doing this, particularly in a new market where there's a lot of education required, we want everyone to be able to learn as fast as possible and go on to being successful. Because as much as we focus on the technical side, the grinding, the polishing, and the producing of a finish, that's not really the challenges that you should be dealing with. You should be dealing with the challenges of balancing your business, scaling if you want to, but certainly running your business so that it's giving back to you what you intended it for, as opposed to pulling your hair out trying to produce the product. Think of any other industry. So if we're making T-shirts, our hardest part to scaling should be finding distributors of our T-shirts and building a brand, not making the actual T-shirt. And I kind of feel like contractors in our industry get so tied up in trying to get the product right, they're not even doing the business yet. And so for us, if we can get the product right, the T-shirts, then we can focus on building the brand, getting the customers and all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of what it's really about, is being able to focus on business, remove the headaches, and then the business should be giving back to the owner for its intended purposes.
Love it. So 2.5 years in the States.
Yeah.
What happened after that?
What happened after that? They ran out of hot dogs. So I went home.
Yeah, too many baseball games.
Okay. So what happened after that was my now wife. She really wanted to go back home to family in Australia. For me, I could have stayed in the States, to be honest with you. It's my heart is in Australia, but my soul is certainly in the US.
In Kansas or Kansas City?
I would say we could visit every now and then. Yeah. But there are some absolutely beautiful places over there, and the industry, the people are just fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome. So you came back home.
Yep. Sorry.
And no, that's all right. Little shout out to America. Love that.
I'm still looking for for another home over there. If anyone's offering those.
Well, quickly into that. Whereabouts in America would you want to set up shop if you could set up anywhere?
Oh, that's too hard. There's so many beautiful places in America. I'd probably just like to live in. Yeah, there's probably not another 50 years left in me.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't mind a year in every state. But I do love the East Coast. Gosh, I love the West Coast.
Too hard of a question. Should we move on?
Yeah.
All right. So came back to Australia, and then what happened for you after that?
Yeah, after we came back to Australia, I thought I was done with the industry forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did go back into cycling or?
Well, I used to ride my bike probably 3 times a week back then when I returned back to Australia. So that was nice.
Mm.
And, we had our contracting business, ProGrind, which had been neglected for a few years while we were distracted by the King Concepts acquisition and then having to work for for Husqvarna.
Yeah.
During that period of time, my brother Ben entered the business of ProGrind, and he was running it, and he'd taken it to some pretty amazing customers, and they had some really interesting opportunities on the horizon. One of the main issues, or the biggest stumbling block that ProGrind had at the time, was the training. Okay, so just the intel, and for a few years, the product Hyperfloor hadn't really evolved. So they were still peddling the same thing. Of course, there was more competition in the market now too, because Husqvarna had really grown the popularity of the product. And so our contracting company was going back and competing with the same product that, the customer base was being told that everyone could supply and provide to them at the same quality. We basically started doing R&D and creating some new products inside of ProGrind for their own purposes, and they developed a new trademark called mechanically polished concrete, MPC.
MPC. All right. So spent some time in ProGrind. Were you still with Husqvarna then?
No, when I moved back to Australia, I had moved back because my contract had ceased.
Okay.
In the US, and I moved back to Australia without a contract.
Okay. So full-time with PGA?
I was not full-time. I was doing, I think, 2 days a week.
Okay. And cycling the other 3?
And cycling the other 3.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice one. Little work-life balance there. Keep working on those calves. Love it. So what year would this be now?
This would be 2000 and I'd say it's going to be around 2011.
2011?
Yep.
All right. So did WORX Plus start to come about then, or was that still a bit off?
No, WORX Plus wasn't around. We were pioneering this new system through ProGrind.
Yeah, MPC.
Yep. And it was just basically the whole family, was involved in getting some more momentum into that business, which was pretty exciting. And some people had learned that we were back in the country because Tim was living in Sweden while I was living in the United States. So they also had to move.
Oh, so the whole family ended up in Husqvarna, or?
So Jaka, Tim, Chris and myself did. Yep. But our brother Ben, he was not involved in the businesses prior to the acquisition. And he moved into ProGrind just after the acquisition.
Okay.
Yeah, to run that business.
Okay, so then around the same time, did everyone come back around the same time?
No, because I'm a slow learner. I had to spend a bit more time in the US. I think I had to work, either 6 or 12 months longer than everyone else on my contract.
Yeah, just needed a bit more help from the teaching staff, or?
Like I said to you before, they gave me a job that I just didn't have the skills for, so I probably just had to make up for it and add some extra value on my way out. So we were all back in the business, getting some momentum into it. Chris was on the other side of the country at this point now, so he lives in Western Australia, so he's not there on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
Wasn't quite as involved. And we had another business hatched over in to Western Australia at the time, which had nothing to do with grinding or polishing of concrete. So yeah, we were basically doing R&D for ProGrind. I was back doing a lot of training the ProGrind staff, making them more efficient and more competitive on site. And what happened next was kind of the tipping point for us, because our previous customers in Victoria heard that we were basically, Tim and I were back in the country and we were known for the machinery side of stuff in the manufacturing, and they started showing up at our facility wanting to have their grinders repaired because they weren't happy with the services they were getting currently. We had a full-time mechanic in our workshop servicing all of the ProGrind machinery. And so Monday, one person turns up. Monday week, another company turns up with broken machinery. And then it kind of snowballed from there. More machines kept on turning up, customers wanting to have their machines repaired by basically, the original. And then they started noticing that the chemicals and the tooling on the shelf for ProGrind weren't of the Husqvarna brand. They were also seeing on site that the results were different, better, and they wanted a piece of that.
And this was all word of mouth. This wasn't marketed.
No marketing. This was just word of mouth. And then we were stuck with this conundrum again.
The power of the people.
Can we buy some of that? Well, we could stitch up the whole market, keep it all for ourselves.
No, we know that's not how you roll.
Yeah. So effectively what happened was we started selling some of this stuff and we started to build a customer base. And it got to a point where we had to make a decision whether we were going to stop doing this, because we weren't really a business as such, that was set up as to be a supplier. We were a contracting company, but people were turning up and buying materials off of us and having their machines serviced. So we had to make a decision whether we were going to do a fully fledged business, and I would quit riding three times a week. And
big decisions.
Yeah, big decisions. And whether we would set up a business that would support contractors and industry, or shut the whole thing off.
And what did you come to?
Brandon, I think you kind of know the answer. We came to the conclusion that we would go back into the industry. We were very fortunate as a family to benefit from the industry, despite having put a lot of energy into it. We had obviously benefited from it, and there was a lot of people who weren't getting the service or the backup that they really needed to be successful, and we wanted to help. So we decided if we're going to do it, we'll do it properly. And so we sat back around the table with the family and nutted out a plan. And as fate would have it, here we are.
That's how WORX Plus was born.
Yeah.
Wow. It's quite a journey. And yeah, I can say I'm glad to be here and be a part of that journey as well, Josh. But
it's been fun.
Yeah. Joshy, so WORX Plus is all about helping the industry. What's your favorite part of this industry?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to argue with you on that one. WORX Plus is not all about helping the industry, because every business, unless they're a charity, should be protecting their business as well. So it's not all about helping the industry, of course. And no one's business should be unless they're a charity. And there's a reason why I'm mentioning this. What was the question again?
What's your favorite part about
What's my favorite part? My favorite part is remembering the full question that you asked. My favorite part about the industry is, I could say it's, we came from a family that was, we didn't grow up with money, and we didn't have a lot of capacity as far as that is concerned. And when we see other families turn up, or we see one member of a family turn up and they're really struggling to work out where the next dollar is going to come from because they can't execute a project properly. They've got a machine that they can't work out how to use it. Or their world is very small. It's this small machine and it's this small dust extractor, and they're struggling to make ends meet. Being able to work with customers like that and then look back over 3 or 4 years from when they came in to being able to help them understand what it is that their machine can do, the limitations, how we can help from, putting the right type of tools under there, showing them how to do an application, and just giving them some capacity. Because like I said before, these are the things that you shouldn't be worrying about as the manufacturer. You should be worrying about building the brand. So being able to watch or witness people going from that struggle to getting to a point where they've got, the capacity to make decisions based on what they want, not on what they absolutely have to do to feed themselves. And being able to go from that point to, okay, I've got a few guys working for me now. I've got a credible business. We've got a brand running, and I'm spending, they're spending time with their family, which was the whole purpose for them doing it in the first place. That, for me, that's the exciting part. That's what I enjoy about it, is being able to take people from where they were and to get somewhere that's really healthy for them and their family, both from a mental perspective and from a financial perspective. And for me, the knock-on effect of that is a better community when kids are growing up in a low-stress environment.
Love that.
Yeah. So awesome. You ask what's next for WORX Plus is just being able to do more of that. Contractors, they often think that they're doing this to help someone, but they're actually running a business. And for me, that's the fun part, is showing them that these struggles that they're dealing with, they've got to get past that point because they need to get to the next point, which is running a business. And the thing that they really need to understand is that they are worthy of that they are worthy of better. They don't need to continue living that way. And so for me, that's what I look forward to, is helping more people get out of that rut and get some capacity and some utility and move forward and just be a better supporter of their own family unit.
Love that, Josh. Really well put. So that's what's next for WORX Plus, is they're just going to keep helping people grow, helping people's businesses grow, and keep that work-life balance is the main goal.
At the expense of our own.
Well, thank you, Josh. Really appreciate having time to sit down with you. And, I've asked you lots of questions over the years that I've been here, and glad to know that everybody else is going to know the same things we know about you, mate.
Brandon, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. I've really enjoyed this, and I think you've done a great job.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for my first time hosting WORX Plus TechTalk Podcast.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you guys soon enough.
This show is proudly supported by WORX Plus. WORX Plus brings total solutions to all concrete grinding and polishing contractors to make it totally work for their daily operations. We hope you've enjoyed this show. Make sure to tune in each week, where we're going to dive deep into all things related to concrete grinding and polishing. We're here to help you so that you can boost your outcomes on the floor.